월요일날 오후 5시가 막 지났습니다. 제가 조금 있으면 전혀 모르는 제 유튜브를 보고 영어를 자기도 그렇게 잘하고 싶다 하는 젊은이를 만나러 제자가 될지 어떨지를 서로 인터뷰를 한번 하러 제가 시청에 나갔는데 7시에 만나기로 했는데, 자, 오늘 영어신문에 우리나라 국내영어신문 3개, 코리아 헤럴드, 코리아 타임즈, 중앙데일리의 오피니언欄만 따로 짤막짤막하게 제목과 일부 내용을 조금씩 한번 읽겠습니다. 워낙 양이 많기 때문에 다 읽을 수는 없고 제목과 조금씩 읽어보겠습니다. Korea Times, May 13, 2024 opinion. AI and climate change. Last March, the company calls the Climate Change Service, C3S, one of the 6 thematic information services provided by the company called Earth Observation Program of the European Union, announced that the world's average temperature in February 2024 was the highest among February temperatures in history. Against this backdrop, AI-based technologies are rising as a next-generation solution to reduce carbon emission, the primary source of global warming, and adapt to climate change is already unfolding on this Earth. Currently, about 75% of AI applications are focused on customer management, marketing and sales, software engineering, and the R&D. It is still unclear whether AI will bring a clear solution to the climate changes that we have been struggling with for more than a decade. However, I remain hopeful for AI's unprecedented potential, since we have only seen the tip of the iceberg. U.S. must stop the Putin. After months of delay, U.S. aid is again flowing to Ukraine, yet the war's trajectory remains uncertain. Russia is determined to win a protracted conflict, while Washington's appetite for further aid remains in question. As the United States head into a presidential election that could be key in determining the war's outcome, we should take a moment to remind ourselves that a Russian victory in Ukraine would spell disaster for the West. In Ukraine, the Kremlin aims not just to subjugate Kyiv, but to rewrite the global order at the expense of Western democracies. The West has the power to stop Putin. The only question is whether we are willing to do so. Unvariable lightness of anti-Zionism. Tel Aviv. There is a juicy joke often attributed to the philosopher Isaiah Berlin that an anti-Semite is someone who hated Jews more than is absolutely necessary. One could say the same about anti-Zionist. After all, Zionism is an old concept which was central to Jewish liberation long before it became synonymous with Palestinian subjugation. In a resignation letter, Sastry noted that she had been assured by her colleagues of Gunnikar's commitment to champion anti-imperialist work, and that it would never act as a mouthpiece for power. But these very people are also Zionists, and they are the only hope for peace. Jewish internationalism died in the crematoria of Auschwitz and in Stalin's gulags. From the ashes of those tragedies, a Jewish state emerged, emancipating millions of destitute Jews, and the country Zionism created has made peace with the key Arab state. Combating population crisis. Mother of all feedbacks, just like this year, last year, the heat was extended from parts of India to Bangladesh and Myanmar and all the way to Thailand. This year it went further east into the Philippines. So it's the same pattern, said Professor K of the Indian Institute of Technology. I do not particularly buy into the idea that El Nino is the cause. That is the burning question, not just for South and Southeast Asia, but for the entire world. A heat wave is a random phenomenon that comes and goes in certain seasons for a period of some days. A climate feedback is forever. You may be about to find out where the limit is, and it could be the mother of all feedbacks. Or maybe it will turn out to be a false alarm this time. The fact that we don't even know which yet illustrated the depths of our ignorance and the scale of peril. To preserve species diversity. For 10 days in early April, the weather was so chilly that I needed to wear thick clothes. Then 2 days were quite hot. Even in this situation, 6 peach trees in front of my house had blossomed, but the honeybees seldom visited them. In recent years, the number of honeybees has decreased dramatically, and around the world, experts have said that there are many regions bees have disappeared. Climate anomalies, farmers' overuse of pesticide and ecocide. Einstein is often attributed to have said, if the bee disappears from the surface of the earth, man would have no more than 4 years to live. The United Nations has recognized the importance of conserving biodiversity, and in 1992 designated May 22nd as the International Day for Biological Diversity. Every year, May 22nd celebration have been held in many countries. However, in reality, farmers have mercilessly killed live worms that are not seen as beneficial to humans by using herbicide and the pesticide. As a result, melting of glacier ice in Antarctica and the Arctic, frequent outbreaks of infectious disease and abnormal climate are bringing serious warnings about our global ecosystem. Silencing of journalists by dictators. Friday was World Press Freedom Day, and a grim reminder of how many voices have recently been silenced by the world's authoritarian regimes. Our colleague Ivan remains wrongfully imprisoned by Russia, where he is being held without a trial or even formal charges. He is one of far too many imprisoned journalists, and those numbers are growing. Authoritarian regimes lock up journalists to control what their citizens can read and see, and in some cases as leverage to trade with the West to get back spies or murderers. As American power has receded in the world, so has the West's ability to protect the journalist. That's something American journalists might reflect on when they criticize their country for its imperfection. 중앙데일리입니다. Korea 중앙데일리 opinion. Europe's geo-economic competitiveness challenge. Economists tend not to worry too much about a country's international competitiveness. Cross-border trade and investment generally benefit both sides, and faster growth in one country benefits others, which can tap its expanding market. It is domestic productivity, not the ability to outcompete the others, that determines national prosperity. That is why 30 years ago, Paul Krugman called competitiveness a dangerous obsession. From a strictly economic perspective, Krugman was right, but with the war in Ukraine still raging and China becoming increasingly assertive and despotic, European leaders can no longer view competitiveness through an exclusively economic lens. Geopolitical considerations are becoming just as, or even more, important. To paraphrase the American political scientist Edward Luttwak, the logic of conflict now supersedes the grammar of commerce. Accounting for geopolitics implies a very different standard for assessing an economy. That is because geopolitics is about power, which is necessarily relative. When it comes to power, size matters. But how well people live does not. In other words, in geoeconomics, to use Luwak's term, the economy is a source of power, not necessarily a source of well-being for the population. Fortunately, U.S. policymakers did not take Luwak's advice. Instead, they kept trade largely free until recently and allowed the manufacturing share of the U.S. economy to decline. That allowed other parts of the economy, notably the digital sector, to expand. Today, the U.S. is home to all the global high-tech giants, and it is undisputed leader in cutting-edge sectors like artificial intelligence. The lesson for Europe is clear. The logic of conflict should spur leaders to revitalize the EU economy, but it must not dictate how they do it. You can't remove location and memory. It was something unimaginable when he was a college student playing guitar in a jazz band. He never thought he would speak up to combine art and technology for a social cause. This is how the professor revived the monument. First, download the app on a smartphone or tablet. In terms of technology, the app can make the monument appear anywhere, but the professor thought that location was important. A man-made object may disappear, but location and memory cannot be erased. Jungang Daily. Editorial. Judiciary too laid back on North's cyber attack. The judiciary's sheer ignorance of the cyber infiltration shows how lax its security system has been. North Korea's hacking ability has advanced more than before. Last month, a hacking group in North Korea was found to have launched an all-out cyber attack on our defense industry to steal its advanced military technology. At the time, more than 10 large defense companies had their sensitive technology piloted by the North, but some of them were not even aware of the theft for more than a year. As we saw in the Ukraine war, cyber war capabilities are essential for national security. Laid back preparation against enemies, hacking campaigns can have a devastating impact on our security. The government must urgently devise countermeasures for such cyber attacks. Our lawmakers must speed up their enactment of a cybersecurity bill. Trump seeks complete economic decoupling with China in his second term. Edison, in his labeling of himself as tariff man, he wants to use that weapon to resolve America's massive trade deficit, thanks to his conviction that promising to lower tariffs and open the U.S. market to 14 countries through free trade agreement, FTAs, only damage U.S. interest. In the same context, Trump had orchestrated America's withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, followed by a relentless push for FTA renegotiation with Korea, Canada, and Mexico. The economic policy proposal Trump promised to implement in his second term, particularly his trade policy toward China, are even more radical than before. During the first term, Trump took the drastic action of imposing a 10 to 25% tariff on Chinese goods worth $550 billion to pressure China. But China remains unperturbed. Instead, the U.S. trade deficit kept swelling during his first term. In a stunning move, Trump also wants to impose a 10% universal tariff on all imports to help reduce the enormous U.S. trade deficit exceeding $1 trillion annually. In 2018, Trump levied a 25% tariff on steel imports from Europe and other allies, and a 10% tariff on aluminum imports, citing security reasons. But the 10% tariff Trump mentioned is a universal tariff imposed on all imports from any countries. As mentioned earlier, Trump's re-election is expected to dramatically change the global security and trade system. It will also negatively affect the Korean economy. The possibility of Trump winning the November election is approximately 50% at the moment. Still, there are several reasons for Korea to methodically brace for his return to the White House. First of all, Korea must urgently build the communication channels with Trump or his close aides. According to news reports, a Trump 2.0 administration will not have anyone who would put the brake on his impulsive and eccentric action that accentuate the need to directly communicate with his campaign aide. Fortunately, the details of Trump's tariff and trade platforms are yet to be finalized, leaving room for Korea to protect its interest by minimizing apparent damages through close communication. Korea needed to pay attention to Japan's effort to build a human network with Trump's campaign in advance, as seen in its appointment of a bureaucrat close to Trump as ambassador to the United States, and its sending of former Prime Minister Taro Aso to New York for his face-to-face meeting with Trump there. At the same time, Korea needed to make the effort to manage and reduce its trade surplus with America. Korea is the United States' eighth largest trade deficit country. Last year, Korea showed a surplus of $44 billion after a steady increase. If Trump imposed a 60% tariff on all Chinese goods, it will likely boost Korea's exports to the U.S. and expand its trade surplus further. But such an immoderate surplus can stimulate the Trump to demand a renegotiation of the Korea-U.S. FTA and undermine Korea's negotiation leverage over other urgent issues between the two countries. At Trump's re-election will surely intensify America's isolation. Korea must strengthen economic cooperation with other countries too. Korea's U.S. biased diplomacy and economic policy may not be viable any longer. Korea already made FTAs with a number of countries whose combined GDP account for a whopping 85% of the world's. But Korea must move on. The country must hurry to join the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, regardless of political difficulties, and deepen economic cooperation with Japan, as well as maintain solid trade and economic relations with China. Bolstering cooperative relations with other countries will be a strategic hedge against all the risk from Trump's re-entry into the White House. Don't waste the remaining 3 years. The president is the most important power in a state. But in reality, there's not much he or she can do to their desire, especially when the ruling power forms a minority in the legislature. Korea's government policies mostly need legislative approval. In the past, when the National Assembly stood subordinate to the executive branch, the mechanism served well for the government. Government officials even prepared the legislative process over presidential decrees, as the former was easier to secure the budget than the latter. Lawmaking was smooth, as the governing party just followed orders from the presidential office. But things changed after the 1987 constitutional amendment, which put an end to the authoritarian regime. President Yoon's remaining 3 years under the opposition-led legislature can be critical for the country's future. But given the deadlocked politics, we can hardly expect bipartisanship. Still, the government must try to seek compromise and the cooperation on specific issues and policies. The next 3 years could set a solid foundation for the country if these efforts are made. President Yoon must borrow wisdom from veteran statesmen, former presidents, House speakers, and prime ministers to overhaul the country's governing system. Korea Herald, reshaping the discourse of their own heritage. The focus of the proposal by Korea's Cultural Heritage Administration to shift the emphasis of the Korean system on perceptions of heritage is a landmark decision. Notably, it reflects the international scholarly discourse and professional best practice thinking in the field of cultural heritage and natural heritage management in that over the last 30 years or so, the concept of heritage, its management process, and the very role it plays in the social arena have gone through significant changes. The focus has gradually shifted from the material and physical dimension of heritage to its value systems and the significance. Today, the non-physical dimension of heritage has acquired a much greater importance to the point of questioning the standard partition between tangible and the intangible heritage. It will render the process of deciding which places are to be conserved clear and determinable on the understanding that conservation is an overall process of looking at the places that are identified as having value for people. It will facilitate starting not just what is important, but why places are important. Happy Mother's Day. Mother's love is the fuel that enables a normal human being to do the impossible. Was Sweden's COVID-19 approach better than US? The Public Health Agency of Sweden recommended that secondary schools and the universities switch to remote education for the final 3 months of the 2020 spring term, but schools opened in autumn. The most important takeaway from the Swedish COVID-19 experience is not that Sweden controlled COVID-19 better, but that any national strategy must account for the impacts of the country's economic, social, educational, and mental health. Putin's next target may be NATO Lake. Things have changed. Last year's Baltic operations exercise included 20 nations, with Finland SC for the first time as a full member, and Sweden participating as an applicant. It boasted nearly 50 ships, 45 aircraft, and 6,000 maritime personnel. Fortunately, the addition of Sweden and Finland to the alliance, called it Putin's folly, gives NATO more options than ever in the Baltic Sea, while Russia had some capabilities. A continuous program for training, exercising, and innovating will ensure NATO has total control over its new lake.